the Horn of Africa. A crossroads of the world where Arab and African traders came together in bustling economic hubs like Mogadishu and Hobyo. A shining example of cultural and ethnic diversity, home to the Amhara, Oromo, and Somali ethnic groups, among others. A treasure trove of natural and cultural significance, from the Lamadaya waterfalls and the lusk-heeled prehistoric cave paintings of Somalia to the rock-hewn churches unique to Ethiopia. This is a special place, but it's also a tragic one. The scene of one of the last phases of colonial expansion in Africa, much of the region was invaded by Italy in 1935, and then partitioned between British and Italian control in the years following World War II. As the shackles of colonialism began to fall away, the transition to independence was a rough one, and the stage was set for a bloody conflict that would reverberate around the world. In this episode of Untangling Africa, we're examining the Ogaden War, a regional conflict that would capture global attention and leave this corner of the African continent reeling. In 1960, the Somali Republic declared independence, uniting lands previously controlled by the British and Italian empires. The new nation would last for only 9 years before it fell once again into tumult, this time in the form of a left-wing coup d'etat led by General Siad Barre in 1969. The coup was a significant event on the global stage as it followed the Yemeni corrective move, a step toward the formation of a socialist state in South Yemen, only 3 months earlier. Communism was now the mode of government on both sides of the Gulf of Aden, and the world was beginning to pay serious attention to the goings-on in East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. The USA, embroiled in a disastrous conflict of their own in Vietnam, would have been dismayed to see Africa as well as Asia falling under the sway of their sworn enemy, communist ideology. They would have been even more dismayed when, 5 years later, the Derg, or Provisional Military Administrative Council, overthrew the government of Emperor Haile Selassie and proclaimed a new regime of socialism in Ethiopia. Leftist thought and politics were gathering strength in East Africa. Those who thought the spread of communism would be contained to the Horn of Africa had not reckoned with the fall of Portugal's African Empire in 1975. After fascist dictator Antonio Salazar died in 1970, his successor, Marcelo Caetano, tried to initiate a softer form of the Estado Novo, or new state, that ruled over Portugal and its subjects. This resulted in the Carnation Revolution in 1974, a democratic Portugal, and, crucially, a glorious opportunity for resistance fighters in its overseas holdings. Mozambique in Southeast Africa was the first to claim independence, embracing the values of socialism as an antidote to the fascism they had experienced under colonial rule. Over in the west of the continent, the Angolans were doing the same thing. Angola had been fighting a war of independence since the early 1960s, but the fall of the Estado Novo opened the doors to a long-awaited triumph. What should have been a glorious victory for the Angolans quickly turned sour as the groups who had united to kick the Portuguese out of their country swiftly began to fight among one another. And so, the MPLA and FNLA found themselves on opposite sides of a brutal civil war that would last for decades. International intervention in regional conflicts was certainly not unheard of. The Americans and the Chinese quickly involved themselves in the Korean War, while American and Australian troops fought side by side in the jungles of Vietnam. The Soviet Union and the United States went head-to-head in a proxy war in Afghanistan and Pakistan in the 1960s, a precursor to the disastrous Afghan occupation by the USSR some 20 years later. But in Angola, the Cold War took on a new turn. In the Angolan Civil War, it was not American boots on the ground nor Soviets, but Cuban, as Fidel Castro sent his troops across the Atlantic to bolster the cause of socialism in Africa. This was not a move sanctioned by the Soviet government in Moscow. This was a communist country acting of its own accord to support a leftist cause in a conflict thousands of miles beyond its borders. The first intervention of this kind for Cuba, it would certainly not be the last. Back in East Africa, the Derg was also finding life difficult post-revolution. Rival factions within the provisional organization grappled for power, resulting in another civil war that would last for almost 2 decades and would deliver such horrors as the Kshitiz, or Red Terror, a series of massacres and atrocities perpetrated by government allies desperate to retain power. The tumult and violence that gripped Ethiopia represented an opportunity for Somalia. At Somalia's western border, a wedge of Ethiopian territory effectively splits the north and south of the country. This wedge of land is known as the Ogaden, and Somalia planned to annex it into their own territory, effectively closing off Ethiopia's access to the Red Sea and capturing its largest airbase. But this was more than just a logistical aim, or a military or even ideological one. It was something much deeper rooted. Many of the peoples of the Ogaden shared an ethnic and cultural identity with those on the Somalian side of the border. With so much bloodshed now unfolding within Ethiopia, annexation would protect these ethnic Somalis while also expanding the nation's own borders. Plans were drawn up and an invasion force was prepared. The idea of 2 socialist states going to war appalled Castro. In 1977, the Cuban premier flew to Aden in South Yemen, ready to put forward the idea of a socialist union between the states of Ethiopia, Somalia, and Eritrea. The union between Egypt and Syria, the United Arab Republic, had failed 6 years previously, but Castro believed it could be different this time. The 3 countries shared borders, creating one contiguous landmass, and the union would supposedly bring peace and stability to a region in turmoil. The Somalian government, still under the command of Siad Barre, who had seized power in 1969, was having none of it. On July 12th, the Somalis invaded, pushing through Ogaden lands and occupying 60% of the territory by the end of the month. Aided by allied groups within Ethiopian territory, notably the WSLF, or Western Somali Liberation Front, the invaders ripped through the Ethiopian defenders and made short work of their divisions and military hardware. But international opinion was not on the side of Somalia. While the USSR had supported the Somalis with equipment, they sided with the Ethiopians, sending General Vasily Petrov to Addis Ababa as an advisor. The Soviet general was reportedly dismayed by the state of the Ethiopian equipment, and the USSR sent a vast airlift of arms and supplies to shore up the Ethiopian defenders. Communist regimes such as South Yemen and North Korea pledged direct assistance to the Ethiopians, although only the Yemenis would be able to put soldiers into action. East Germany, another communist state, offered other supports such as training for troops. Even non-communist Israel, who did not maintain official diplomatic relations with Ethiopia, armed the Derg against the invading Somalis. Despite international opposition, the war was going well for Somalia in its initial phases, effectively dominating Ethiopian airspace with its MiG-21 planes and pushing right up to the outskirts of Dire Dawa, a city of enormous strategic significance to both sides. But such gains wouldn't last. After trying to bring about a ceasefire, the USSR decided to ditch Somalia altogether, throwing its full weight behind the Ethiopian cause, but stopping short of sending regular troops. In the communist world, only China and Romania supported Barre and his Somali army, although neither would provide meaningful assistance to Somalian forces on the ground. After a disastrous opening to the war, the weight of support for the Ethiopians was beginning to tell, and the defenders gradually re-established airborne supremacy. What's more, the strategic objective of Dire Dawa was proving a tough nut to crack, and the Somalian forces were taking enormous casualties in each engagement as the defenders clung on. The war was in its 2nd month, and it appeared the tide was turning. The most significant foreign intervention, however, was yet to occur. By September, Ethiopia controlled only 10% of the Ogaden, but was far from defeated. With air superiority now theirs, Ethiopian planes were able to hit Somali armor hard, while the rainy season slowed Somalian advances. There was also significant infighting between the Somali National Army and their WSLF allies, making further progress difficult. But it was the Battle of Harar from October 1977 to January the following year that would bring the biggest turning point of the war. The ranks of the Ethiopians had been swelled by a huge recruitment drive, and a militia of 100,000 men had joined the cause. Alongside them were 1,500 Soviet military advisors and 16,000 soldiers from Castro's Cuba, ready to put an end to the conflict. Exhausted, battered, and broken, the Somalis fell back in January 1978. Things were looking bleak for Siad Barre, and they were about to get bleaker still. In February 1978, the Ethiopians launched their counterattack. Ethiopian and Cuban soldiers fought side by side, pushing the Somalis back across the Ogaden region and reversing the gains of the previous year. Then, the coalition made a move that even the embattled Somalians didn't expect. They broke northeast, sending a column of Ethiopian and Cuban troops into the unforgiving terrain that separated Jajiga from the Somalian border. Supported by Soviet helicopters and by a withering Cuban artillery bombardment, the Ethiopians took Jajiga in only 48 hours, leaving as many as 6,000 Somalis dead or wounded. The game was up. By mid-March, all Somali units had withdrawn and all seized territory was ceded back to Ethiopia. The war was over. Cuban and Ethiopian soldiers had marched together to victory in the Horn of Africa. The war was an unmitigated disaster for Siad Barre and his regime. Over 6,500 Somali troops lay dead in the Ogaden, with 2,500 wounded. The armed forces had lost 28 aircraft, 11 helicopters, and more than 200 tanks, losses they could ill afford. 500,000 ethnic Somalis living in the Ogaden were displaced. What's more, the communist states of the USSR, Cuba, North Korea, and East Germany had abandoned Somalia when it mattered. Ongoing friendships with China and Romania would not be enough to quell the increased isolation of Somalia on the world stage. While an attempted coup d'etat in April 1978 threatened to bring an end to the Barre regime. But Barre, his ears still ringing from the carnage of the Ogaden, was not going to relinquish power without a fight. His Red Beret Special Forces units committed horrific atrocities against rebel clans, and a bitter civil war broke out in Somalia, with the legacy of that civil war costing countless lives and leaving many more in abject misery. Advice from the US State Department regarding travel to Somalia recently went viral. Among other tidbits, the memorandum recommended drafting a will, leaving DNA samples in case your family needs to access them, and discussing plans and funeral wishes with loved ones. This shattered country and the heartbreaking loss of life seen here in the Horn of Africa is the legacy of those few short months in 1977 and 1978. Even today, Somalia's suffering has not yet ended. But let us know your thoughts on the Ogaden conflict. Is there anything we missed? Anything you found especially interesting? And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.